Before we begin today's video, I'd like to give a shout out to one of our newest subscribers, Joseph Gorsa. Thank you for subscribing, and welcome to the family. And now on with today's video. Planeshift Omenket, the Egyptian-inspired plane from the Magic the Gathering series, has its own supplement, thanks to the Planeshift series, and with it we get a very special race, the Khenra, a series of jackal-headed, humanoids that are basically our Dogfolk, which I find it rather strange yet infuriating that it took a module that is technically not a core set to give us a Dogfolk in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And yet Pathfinder 2nd edition not only has their own Dogfolk in the form of the Shuni, but also has the Gnoll race as well. It's another race that I wish we could have gotten in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So yeah, I think Pathfinder's a little bit more consistent in giving us material that we actually want. Sorry, Wizards of the Coast, but, not sorry. You know what you've been doing. Stuff we don't want. Anyway, like I said, the Khenra is a race of jackal-headed humanoids, and these individuals are special. Normally, I would not go over the mechanics of a race, but I find this racial feature from the Khenra to be significant for the purposes of lore study, and that is the Khenra twins. Khenra come in a set when they are born. They are twins. And that's how they are born most of the time. There is the rare case when a Khenra is not born with a twin, and this is seen as a sort of rarity, an omen, if you will. Cultural significance, this solo Khenra is seen as killing their twin in the womb, making them the perfect initiate for the Trial of Zeal. And we actually get to see the mechanic in action with a living and a dead twin. If your twin is alive and you can see your twin, whenever you roll a 1 on an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you can re-roll the die and must use the new roll. If your twin is dead, or if you were born without a twin, you can't be frightened. It is definitely an interesting mechanic that probably can be played into. I would even recommend having 2 Khenra characters in the party who are twins. That way you get the benefits of this Khenra twins ability. As far as classes go, there are a lot of different classes that a Khenra can be, so long as it goes well with the Trial of Zeal, which is their most prominent trial because of their deity, who is the goddess of zeal. Now, another thing to note here is that since Omenket is Egyptian themed, if you're looking for any extra inspiration, I would recommend Kobold Press's Southland series, since it is very similar to Omenket and its inspiration. Furthermore, another thing to note about the Khenra is that they like to tussle, sort of wrestling with each other, and they also find entertainment in their rivalry with Minotaurs. Now, this is sort of a friendly rivalry. They just like to pit their more dexterous skills against the Minotaur's strength-based skills, which I find very amusing. And another thing that you can probably use in your party is these sort of friendly rivalries. And it is nice that we actually have races that give an in-lore reason to have a rivalry with another player race. If you're looking for a Minotaur character, I would suggest going into the comment section below. There you will find a link to my character concept build for the Minotaur. And speaking of which, I have gone this much deep into the lore without explaining the series. Hello, I am Drehon, and this is Character Concept. We are now in the Plane Shift series. During Character Concept, we take a look at each of the races that have been released for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and pairing them with backgrounds and classes, see what type of characters you can make using the lore of these races. And we are doing Khenra. Now, for your backgrounds, I see the most common backgrounds for a Khenra being the Gladiator, the Initiate, the Soldier, and the Vizier. The Initiate and the Vizier being released in Planeshift Amonkhet. And I picked Vizier because it is stated that the Khenra are among the God of Zeal's favorite Viziers. For your classes, it seems that the most popular of Khenra classes to pick are the Cleric, Fighter, Ranger, Rogue, and Wizard. Now, let's go ahead and get straight into the deep dive and see what subclasses would best fit the Khenra. Starting things off, we are going with Barbarian, and I think the primal path of the Beast, Giant, Storm Herald, the Totem Warrior, my apologies, and the Zealot are going to be subclasses that work with the Khenra, and I picked Zealot simply for the Goddess of Zeal, Hazoret, a jackal-headed god. And since she is Zeal, yes, we are definitely going to have to go with Zealot. Though another interesting one is the Totem Warrior and the Giant, and that is because of a very specific Khenra, Earthshaker Khenra. In the token variant, the Earthshaker Khenra Eternal, it is wielding a monolith as a weapon instead of a spear. If you do not know, a monolith has a base height of around 100 feet and is able to weigh hundreds of tons. So that is why I wanted to go with the Giant Barbarian as well as the Totem Warrior Barbarian for this reason, because it is not exactly natural for a medium-sized creature to be able to wield a 100-foot tall piece of rock as a weapon. But it would make perfect sense to have the path of the Giant do so, or even the Totem Warrior. Moving on over to Bard. This is mostly to pair along with that Khenra twin mechanic. If you are a lone Khenra with no twin, it definitely makes sense mechanically speaking to go with Bard, as they have the ability Counter Charm. Having Counter Charm paired up with the ability to not be frightened at all, not advantage, just not at all, is pretty good from a mechanical standpoint. But I do see the College of Swords and Valor to be the best bards to pair up with the Khenra, since they are going after these trials, and they might even try to cheer on anyone going into the trials as a way to help them succeed in the task ahead. Moving on to Cleric, going off of the Goddess Hazoret, we do have the Zeal Divine Domain. But there is another god from Emoket to take a look at, and that is our snake god, whose name escapes me. But he is the god of strength. Some Khenras will actually turn to this god when the goddess of zeal is not enough for them. So those two definitely work the best, but I can also see an argument for the domains of death if you're looking for an Anubis-inspired build, as well as the divine domain of the grave. And of course, since we are talking about Magic the Gathering, we cannot forget the domain of war as a reference to the War of the Spark, and the Khenra's help in facing off against Nicobolus and his army of Eternals. Moving on to Druid, there wasn't really much to pair up with the Khenra, so I just put in the Desert Land Druid and the Moon Druid as possible druids that a Khenra could take. Now, there is an Eternal Khenra known as the Wildfire Khenra, Wildfire Eternal, and it is a Cleric, but there is a Wildfire Druid, so if you wanted to go with that, you could. Moving on to Fighter, this is probably going to be your most common Khenra character, and for your martial archetypes, I would definitely see the Brute, which is an Unearthed Arcana martial archetype, the Cavalier for anyone that is riding a chariot, your Champion, which is going to be the most common I feel for anyone taking on the 4 trials, the Echo Knight more as a symbolic subclass, as a way to possibly reconnect with your twin who has perished and they have a unrealized future, an unrealized timeline. The Eldritch Knight, Rune Knight, and Scout, another Unearthed Arcana subclass, also work well with the Khenra, mostly for those hunters or magical Khenra fighters, like the Spell Spear Khenra. Moving on to another class that I don't think is going to see much play with the Khenra as far as lore goes, that is the Monk. Though if you do choose a Monk, I would suggest going with the monastic tradition of Way of the Kinsey, since they do heavily use weapons, especially with the Khenra automatically being proficient with a Khopesh, which is the special Egyptian sword, which you can find a Khopesh in the Southlands Player's Guide for Kobold Press if you are looking to use that weapon. Moving on to Paladin. I don't see many Khenra using this class, but it is almost as good as a fighter, especially when considering the trials. The Sacred Oath of Glory is going to be one such subclass that would work perfectly for a Khenra character going through these trials, since the whole point of going through the trials is for glory and honor, to have the ability to join the God Pharaoh in the afterlife. A Paladin Oath of Vengeance might work for anyone trying to avenge their fallen twin who fell in battle or fell because of the misdeeds of the gods. Because if I remember correctly, there are some instances where someone might not like the gods too much given their active role. And finally, Oath of the Watchers, once again going off of that theme of the War of the Spark, but also the battle with the Phyrexians, since they also had a hand in that during that arc. Moving on to Ranger, probably another one of the more common classes that you will choose for your Khenra. The Ranger conclaves that would best fit are the Beastmaster, Horizon Walker, Hunter, and Swarm Keeper. I only put Horizon Walker on this list in much the same way as I put the Oath of the Watchers on the list of Paladin subclasses, in that it works perfectly thematically with the story of Magic the Gathering's War of the Spark set and with the Phyrexian invasion. Moving on to Rogue, the Arcane Trickster, Assassin, Phantom, and Scout are probably going to be the more popular Rogue archetypes, and that's one would choose for their Khenra. Especially that Arcane Trickster for those slightly more spell-inclined characters. Next is the Warlock, and I only chose this simply for the Eternals. The zombified, well, the evil version of the zombification that takes place on Amonkhet. The dark powers that Nicol Bolas puts onto those who have completed the trials, bringing them back as these dark undead, as opposed to the embalming that normally goes on to bring back those who have passed on Amonkhet. The Eternals are being shown here in the form of the otherworldly patron undead, with their special ability to take on a ghastly form, similar to the ones that we see in most of the Eternal cards. And finally, I cannot go without leaving at least one spellcaster, and that would be the Wizard class with the Arcane tradition of War Magic. And unfortunately, that is all the time I have for you today. I do hope that you enjoyed. Tell me down in the comments section what type of character you would create for the Khenra race. And until next time, this has been Drehan, and I am offline.